Bien, vamos a empezar el seminario del día de hoy. I would like to welcome Dra.Halla Thorsteinsdottir. The presentation of Dra. Thorsteinsdottir will be done by Melina, who visited her in Toronto last winter.
Thank you. I am very pleased to introduce our speaker today, Dra.Halla Thorsteinsdottir, who is the director of the Small Globe Inc., a non-profit organization which is a consulting firm on biotechnology for health. And also, she is adjunct professor at the University of Toronto. She has actively researched health innovation and international relations in Canada and in low and middle income countries including Brazil, Cuba, China, India, and South Africa. Halla's research has been published in high-impact journals such as Nature Biotechnology, Nature Genetics, Science, Research Policy, and The Lancet. She is author of the book South-South Collaboration in the Health Biotechnology, which details how partnerships grow among developing countries. Halla is a transdisciplinary professor since she holds a doctoral degree in Science and Technology Studies granted by the Science and Technology Policy Research Unit in the University of Sussex in England. And also, she obtained a master's degree in Development Economics from the Norman Paterson School of International Affairs at Carleton University in Canada. She has received several awards, including Canadian Institutes of Health Research Augmented Principal Investigator Prize, and has advised also organizations such as Industry of Canada, the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, the United Nations Development Programme, and South Africa's Technology Innovation Agency, all on innovation strategies and international relations. Her visit to Cinvestav is important to our program, since I am sure the lessons to learn from her are significant to understand how developing countries such as Mexico can encourage endeavors, public and private, to develop biotechnology research and biotechnology industry. Halla, thank you for visiting us and delivering these lectures. Bienvenido.
Yes.
Thank you very much, and I'm sorry for this interruption. It all started last fall. I got an email from Nellie and asking if she could come for a visit in Toronto, at the University of Toronto. I thought what she was doing seemed interesting. I didn't know anything about what very, very little about Cinvestav, so I thought that was a wonderful learning opportunity. But then she arrived on the coldest day of the year that I've ever experienced in Toronto, and actually I learned a new word this winter. It's called polar vertex. It was the coldest winter we've ever experienced. But she survived to tell the tale and is still smiling, so that's good. So I want to talk about start my first presentation on health biotechnology on a global stage. So, first of all, I want to highlight how the global scene in science and technology in general is changing. There's some changing of the guards and the way it all looks. I want to then discuss the increased role of emerging economies and also some developing countries in health biotechnology. I would like to really spend most of the time to discuss a study on social collaboration in health biotechnology that we conducted. And then at the end, I would like to draw out the key messages on how to promote health biotechnology innovation on a global stage. So this is a kind of a territory that I'd like to cover in this presentation today.
Oh.
Okay, so this is is a graph from the OECD from 2010. And I think it shows very well the changing landscape in science and technology in general. We see, yes, the circles reflect the number of papers produced in those countries, and the linkages between the countries reflect the number of co-authored papers between these countries. And from looking at those graphs in 1998 and 2008, we see that there's a huge change happening. You know, yes, U.S. was it the most largest producer in science and technology in general, and it still is. It still is by far the largest producer. But one of the things we see is that China was a small producer in that time, but now it's become a very, very considerable producer. This is also another happening in India. Has increased its production, and so has Brazil. So the relative emphasis of those countries in producing science and technology has changed considerably in such a short time. But what's also quite interesting to see is that there's much sparser linkages between countries. You know, there are certain countries, yes, you know, U.S. and Canada, and the United Kingdom and the U.S. that have quite a bit of linkages. But here, it's the linkages are becoming much more prominent, and we're seeing much more networked sort of science and technology production system, and that also applies to the emerging economies, which had a very sparse one and are increasing their linkages. So what we also have observed is that increasing funding, particularly by the emerging economy, has changed a lot, and towards science and technology R&D. And this is the gross expenditure towards R&D as a percentage of GDP has increased in emerging economies considerably by something like 2% percentage, which is very large. Whereas, for example, at the same time, Canada, it's reducing, which is very depressing. But because also the emerging economies are experiencing growth, this results in considerably more resources for R&D. And here's a map from the UNESCO, the graph from UNESCO. It shows the gross expenditure towards R&D. And it shows certainly, yes, the U.S. is the largest, Japan is the number 2, but number 3 is now China. So unfortunately, Mexico was not didn't make it to this map, and I'm sure Canada is not going to make it to the next edition if they reduce the resources towards R&D. So when we look at particularly on health biotechnology, we also observe this sort of same type of changes. And this is a graph that is represent the number of health biotechnology papers, starting with the first period was in 1998, and the last period was in 2009. And what is particularly amazing in this is to see this change here in China. It's really there's a huge steep increase in publications in health biotechnology as well. We see a little bit of dip in Japan. I didn't include the U.S. on this graph because I wanted to see the changes in those countries. With the U.S., everything is squashed together, and we had to start to do more, fancy things in terms of graphing than I had time to do. But we also see an increasing, increasing in some of the other countries. I also looked at the countries of the Americas, and other low and middle-income countries in the Americas, and I saw Brazil has been increasing its publications in health biotechnology. Mexico is number 2, and there's also an increase in the papers as well. So these are some like sort of just a little bit more. There's, however, a tiny bit. The Mexico relative status in health biotechnology, however, seems to be slipping, and it was 25th of all the countries in the world in 1996, but it's now was 30th in the last year where we had full data in 2008. And what we're seeing is that countries such as Greece, Czech Republic, those countries, they've been moving ahead, a little bit ahead of Mexico. But the numbers of papers are however increasing. It needs to be a little bit more if they want to keep the publication status. But there's also what is also changing on the health biotechnology space is collaboration, as I mentioned, in general in science and technology in the first graph, but also in health biotechnology. And for example, the number of papers in collaboration has been steadily increasing. Collaboration rate in the field as a whole increased from 17 to 5% in 1996 to 22% in 2008. So there's an increasing emphasis on international cooperation, which is reflected in this graph about internationally co-authored papers from 2 or more countries. When we start to look at the networks in health biotechnology, then you see that most of the networks, they reflect north-north collaboration. So almost all, or 99% of international collaboration involves north-north linkages, whereas 27% involve north-south or south-south linkages. It's actually more than 100% because papers can be co-authored by both north-north and also north-south or etc. So that's explained why it's a little more. And developing countries' participation in international health biotechnology network is increasing from 19% in 1996 to 34% in 2008. So this is a considerable increase. And I just want to kind of stress the importance to be a part of networks, because this is yes, we can all have access to published knowledge nowadays, but to get it, the access to cutting edge knowledge that's happening in different parts of the world is important for all countries now. So we will start to hear more and more on the dialogue is South-South cooperation. And people also start to talk about the importance of South-South cooperation. Countries are signing agreements to encourage South-South cooperation, in particularly in science and technology fields. And with this increasing capacity and in subfields, in fields like health biotechnology, there's an increasing scope also for international cooperation between developing countries. So I together with a research group from several countries, southern countries, we decided that we wanted to examine really what is happening in South-South cooperation in this field. Is that become a reality, or is it just rhetoric? And so basically, we also wanted to understand what's the impact of the collaboration. Has it had some impact or not? So I started to work together with this team from 5 developing low middle-income countries on this project on South-South cooperation. Here's a photo of the whole team. We come from different types of organizations and quite culturally diverse. So this sort of historical context of South-South cooperation is that with independence from the colonial powers, there were political and economic incentives to find alternatives to relations to the North. This was very clear in trades, because when countries were colonies of the North, they did most of the trades with the northern colonies, and the terms of trade with the former colonial powers were quite unfavorable, and they wanted to therefore to explore much wider trading potentials. The Bandung Conference between the Asian and African countries in 1955 in Indonesia, it marked the beginning of formal South-South relations between developing countries. It's been sort of said to be a landmark. And further development included a non-aligned movements of countries and support from some United Nations involvement, for example, by setting up United Nations Development Program, special unit for South-South cooperation. So slowly what's starting to happen is that there's an institutional infrastructure built up to promote South-South cooperation. The cooperation can be of different formats. It can be bilateral cooperation between countries, and that's exactly what we've been observing, that there's been an increase, an extensive increase in those bilateral agreements in the last few years. And with countries such as China and India making collateral agreements with a lot of African countries, increasingly those agreements are prioritize science and technology, and biotechnology and health are often singled out as a sort of as a special priority areas. But we also have seen sort of regional collaboration that's been built up, for example, in Asia and other parts of the world. And many of those regional cooperation, they started more in terms of trade, but they all are starting to implement science and technology component as well, as they sort of the perception is of the importance of cooperation with science and technology. We also see sort of multilateral initiatives such as the India, Brazil, South Africa initiative, and that again, which was established in 2003, that again has a component of working together to work in dealing with their joint health problems. So the drivers of the South-South collaboration has been, first of all, diversification of economies, as we talked about. But there's also been sort of political force to stick together to counteract political influence on other countries. That's for example, has been quite clear with the World Trade Organization, within the World Trade Organization, and also, like for example, in dealing with the patent agreements, the patenting of pharmaceutical have been, developing countries have been sticking together as a whole to kind of lobby a mutual sound. So in this dialogue, there's an increased reference to common needs or clusters of common problems, common interests. And developing countries, they certainly have many environmental, health, and climate-induced problems that northern countries do not have, and therefore makes sense for them to work together in addressing them. But there's also what developing countries have is often a strong need to come up with more cost-effective solutions, because cost often being an issue in implementing these things. But there's a concern about increasing South-South divide. So in some countries, such as the emerging economies, they are becoming very rich, they're becoming very scientific proficient, so they don't necessarily have the same problem as the other lower middle income countries. At the same time, this difference provides actually a scope for countries to learn from each other. So the difference can also be important in terms of learning, and sort of particularly in science intensive areas. So the study on South-South collaboration sort of had the main research objective, first of all, to map the levels of geographic distribution and key characteristics of South-South health biotechnology collaboration. But then it had the objective to identify the opportunities the drivers, the challenges, and the impacts of the collaboration, and to understand really what factors and conditions shape the collaboration. So the scope of this research was quite wide. On one hand, it was wanted to study research collaboration, which involved mostly collaboration between universities or collaboration involving public research organizations. But we also wanted to study entrepreneurial collaboration, which involved mostly collaboration between firms, private sector firms. So we considered partnership very broadly, so as partnership between groups and firms in low and middle-income countries as outside cooperation. So we didn't put anything within health biotechnology field was involved, but we didn't put say we want to study this. Marketing is not outside the realm of the studies, for example. And we relied on the World Bank's classification of countries in the low and middle income countries and chose the one that the World Bank. So to conduct the mapping exercises, we used co-publications from the Scopus database as a proxy for research collaboration. And we used a survey, we administered a survey to all the biotechnology firms we could identify in Brazil, China, Cuba, Egypt, India, and South Africa to map entrepreneurial collaboration. It would have been good to have a wider set of countries, but just this sort of the scope of the study didn't really allow it. So we identified countries that were in different regions and had some strength in health biotechnology. And we asked them about their linkages with all the other countries. We also conducted the case studies of bilateral collaboration project. And there we interviewed different collaborators in the different countries to have a perspective of the two different countries. And we also interviewed quite a different types of experts in promoting the cooperation from government pushing for cooperation, from patenting people in patent expert, from people from regulatory agencies, etc. So a wide set of people. And in the case studies, research involved the countries in red, and altogether it's 13 countries, which was a part of the study, and 348 interviews. It's too bad Mexico was not a part of the study. That would be more interesting for you as an audience to have that and interesting to know, but we just couldn't do everything. So the conceptual framework for this work, this innovation system framework. And this is as a sort of when we've been reading the literature, we've been seeing that scholars that are studying particularly the North-South collaboration, they have started to emphasize that it's important to perceive and promote the collaboration as a part of an innovation system perspective. So without this sort of, without promoting and understanding it, the collaboration would have less impact. So according to this innovation system perspective, innovation is the result of complex relationships and knowledge flow between various actors in the system. And they include firms, they include universities, they include government, and different types of user groups. This is a very, very simplified scheme of innovation system, and this is more about a kind of a focal lens for us to look at it. But there are other factors and conditions that are part of the innovation system and that have effects of have shape innovation. So. And we also followed a very broad definition of innovation. It's not only new to the world innovation, it can also be rather an innovation that's new to the country. And we use this is from the International Development Research Center in Canada, that looks at innovation as processes that improve people's lives by transforming knowledge into new or improved ways of doing things in a place. where they have not been used before. So it's sort of that very inclusive innovation there. So I'm almost over in this innovation system concept, but I think it's important to discuss it. So innovation systems have, on the other hand, been defined as open, evolving, and complex systems that encompasses relationships within and between organization, institution, and socio-economic structure, which determine the rate and direction of innovation and competence building emanating from processes of both science-based and experience-based learning. So science is an important part certainly in health, biotechnology, innovation, but it's not the only. The experience-based learning is also a part of it. And this innovation system, they include formal organizations such as firms, universities, research centers, etc. But also institutions which are sets of common habits, social norms, routines, and laws. And IP, intellectual property laws, for example, are very important in this aspect. And they can vary according to scale. They can be supranational, national, or subnational, depending on the situation. And so this has been, basically this sort of concept has been evolving from the mid-80s. It was the original architects where these people, it originated in evolutionary economics, when they were sort of studying technological change to understand how and why nations differ in the mode of innovation. And one of the central concepts of it is learning. How does learning occur in the system? And it became both at the firm at the firm level and also at the whole system level. Interactions are crucial for learning, according to innovation system. So if you look at South-South research collaboration, to what extent? Our first question now is actually to what extent are developing countries conducting research in health biotechnology together? And with the first map we did was very, very depressing actually. First of all, if you look at the proportion of international co-authored papers by low and middle income countries, then almost all of them are in South-North or North-South cooperation. And very, very small proportion as a whole is in South-South cooperation. So there's a huge gap between this. It's sort of the relative emphasis on South-South cooperation is so much smaller. And what is also really depressing when you look at this graph is that there's no change over time. It's not increasing. And so we started to sort of, this was on the macro level for actually all countries that are classified as low and middle income countries, not just the 13 ones we focused on in the case study. But when we started to look at sort of South-South research collaboration with select countries, we saw actually a larger emphasis as a whole on South-South cooperation in some countries, and also more of an increase. And here, for example, I included in purple the South-South cooperation with Mexico, and it actually has increased from about 15% at the beginning of it to about 23% at the end of it. So 23% of the international co-author paper in health biotechnology in Mexico is now with other low and middle income countries. So it's quite considerable emphasis on South-South cooperation. And we also saw an emphasis, for example, South Africa, yes, large emphasis, and basically all the focal countries of our study, except for China. China, it doesn't emphasize South-South cooperation in health biotechnology field very much. There's very little change over time, and China, as we talked about, has become the second largest producers in health biotechnology. So this is actually shows us how, by looking at something at the macro level, it masks, the realities happening at a more micro level. China's dominance in the health biotechnology field of low middle income countries and relatively small emphasis on South-South cooperation masks the overall emphasis that is happening. So we can't stop always just at the country level, especially when we have such an uneven contributions of, to whatever statistics we are focusing on. So when we looked at the geography of South-South research collaboration, we saw, yes, there was quite a bit. The emerging economies were quite a bit. One of the things that was quite interesting is one of the largest number of co-authored papers of any countries in the lower middle income countries was actually between Argentina and Brazil, and then later on we found out that that's the only countries that have had actually a specific funding program for their cooperation in biotechnology. So we could sort of, in that way, we could sort of see that there's been some influences of allocating funding towards it. When we actually, I just want to go back. No. When we look at this at the macro level also, we can see how relatively fewer networks involve Africa, and it's kind of it's more between the emerging economy. And I just wanted to highlight that at the macro level, Africa is not involved much. But I think we also looked at the different disease level, both of malaria and HIV/AIDS, and then we start to see much more different types of actually a landscape. We see much more varied contributors to this field, not just the emerging economies, but more countries. Thailand is active, and what we see a much more involvement of countries in Africa. So we see in that respect, health biotechnology whole, there's a different story, or when we look at a specific disease focus. So I just wanted to add this because I'm here to just for your, if you were interested, Mexico's key collaborators in research collaboration in the health biotechnology. If you look at the southern countries, Brazil is #1, China is actually #2, and then Cuba. But with northern countries, not surprisingly, U.S. is by far the most common collaborator. I mean, it is the most common producers of health biotechnology, so it's good for Mexico to go to work with people in that way, respect. But some of the the level of cooperation with some of the northern partners, such as Italy and Japan, is on par with southern countries. So this is. So we in the interviews we actually studied further. Okay, this is the sort of the mapping of the collaboration, but now we wanted to understand what's been driving the collaboration, and we saw that. We heard from our interviewees that a key driver for the cooperation was shared health problems, and they could be very different, particularly from the different parts of Chagas disease. Diagnostics was an important cooperation between Brazil and Argentina, cholera vaccine between India and Bangladesh, etc. But that was actually a strong message. Was the health problems of the was driving the cooperation. We also heard the message that developing countries were collaborating in order to access each other's expertise. And we saw a strong capacity building effects of the efforts involved in the collaboration, where different countries were collaborating in order to build up capacity. But we also saw often some complementary expertise, where actually by presenting different types of expertise, the collaborators could actually strengthen their research. And an example of that was, for example, China and India were collaborating with mitochondrial DNA, and India gained access to China's sequencing infrastructure and expertise, and was important for it. So this type of complementary expertise could be very diverse, and we saw often sort of some pockets of expertise in the smaller developing countries, which was important for the collaboration and helped the collaboration also. So everybody was sort of a player in it. It wasn't just the big players, you know, do it. We saw also a driver for the collaboration was access to clinical samples, biodiversity, etc. That we saw it in so many different ways. It was sometimes some parasite. We saw it sometimes in some disease samples. But it actually to gain access to each of the samples really helped it and helped the sort of comparative aspects of the study. There's a lot of challenges as a part of the collaboration, and number one, actually, I mean, it was by far the most common one was that there was few resources allocated to South-South research collaboration. It was much more easy to get funding for collaboration with the North. So I mean, many of these agreements, you know, that are made between countries and singling out biotechnology, singling out health, they don't have any resources allocated in it, and that really limits the collaboration. We saw long times and cost to move samples between countries, and that problem had people commented on it had become much worse after 9/11, and it really was going through customs, going through the whole system was very challenging. But we saw sometimes misalignments of new South-South collaboration initiative with existing collaboration, when there was sometimes there had been collaboration going on between two research groups in two countries. All of a sudden there was some money put into a new initiative set possible, then actually those who had been collaborating were not necessarily the ones who got the funding. So they felt like the funding would rather go to the strongest researchers, but they were not necessarily that much pro-South-South cooperation. That was one of the concerns expressed. But the last one was that I want to highlight here was that capacity building efforts, they don't always contribute towards research and health and promotion efforts because of lack of local infrastructure. Two countries were working together. The country was stronger in health biotechnology, was training country B, and it was actually training that would be very relevant to the health problems and research agenda of country B. But when they went home, they didn't have any chance to do research on it. They didn't have any infrastructure, so those efforts were not aligned together. So that really, what we sort of start to see in the challenges in research collaboration was that systemic misalignments hampers the collaboration, different types of systemic misalignment. So the sort of main impacts of the research collaboration was that we saw gains in health biotechnology knowledge creation, and which was sort of measured in co-publication. But we saw capacity building in health biotechnology, where they were extending capacity through South-South cooperation, and building of South-South networks in the health biotechnology field. What was, however, clear is that there wasn't rather limited impacts on development of products or services. This research collaboration didn't translate into more applied focus in terms of services. So I just want to take one example. So some collaboration that was some collaboration that involved Latin America, and that was a collaboration in Chagas Diagnostics. This was a network of research in 90 Latin American countries, and they've been carrying out research on diagnostic for Chagas disease, and this was diagnostic was to be used in low resource settings. The funding was jointly from Brazil, Argentina, Spain, and the World Health Organization. The results showed very high sensitivity and specificity, and actually sort of they were fairly successful in this. But one of the things was I found kind of depressing is that when they came to actually commercialize this finding. They worked with, there's a US company that did it. There was none of the companies in this country. So I think that I wanted to see something else there. But so altogether, it's a contribution of the research collaboration with global health. If you look at that, is that developing countries, they can contribute towards improving health through South-South research collaboration and health biotechnology. That's what the research would show. But the collaboration levels are low, and funding to support the collaboration is seriously lacking. So and the misalignment between the participating countries have limited the impact of the research collaboration. And therefore, that altogether, we would sort of say the contributions of the South-South research collaboration and health biotechnology so far has been limited. So moving into the entrepreneurial collaboration, we also wanted to look at to what extent firms were working together and what was the kind of the impact of the firm. And we, as we said, we did a survey of the firms in those sort of key countries and asked them about their collaboration with all other low and middle income countries. And when actually we saw that that actually like 6% had only South-South, were only involved in South-South cooperation, but 21% was involved in both North-South and South-South collaboration. So in a way, 26% of 7% of our respondents were in some ways involved in South-South cooperation. So we actually, there was more cooperation than we expected on the firm level. I mean, cooperation with the North is still more, with over 50% of the firms saying they had cooperation with the North. But with US so dominating in the field, we would always expect that, that scenario. We saw that actually the smaller countries, such as Cuba, South Africa, they had a relatively larger emphasis on South-South cooperation than the larger one like China and India. And when we mapped the collaboration, we saw quite a bit of linkages between the emerging economies, these things, but we also saw regional linkages. For example, here South Africa's cooperation with different countries in Africa. So it wasn't just the collaboration between the emerging economies, it was more widely. But when we asked about what was really involved in this collaboration, what we started to see is that it was distribution, marketing, was sort of commercialization activities were by far the largest part of this. So this was most of the cooperation involved the commercialization. It was limited to the R&D, clinical trials, etc. However, if you look at all those companies that did some R&D, they also had some commercial cooperation as well. So it would, I think it would be an interest to do a further study to see if that commercial cooperation actually sort of build up trust between the firms, so they sort of slowly started to do it. However, we also have to bear in mind that not all of these firms are doing R&D, so therefore they're not likely to be doing R&D involving in South-South cooperation, because some of those firms they just license technology from the North and etc. So the drivers for the entrepreneurial collaboration was very much in harmony with that was access to new suppliers and markets. This is the most important driver for all the countries surveyed. Transfer of technology was also sometime mentioned, and there were some very important examples of that which was highlighted. For example, when Egypt developed transfer technology to produce recombinant insulin within the country by transferring the technology from a Chinese firm. And actually, before this, they didn't have any national ability to develop recombinant insulin. And actually, they felt, because of political reasons and a sort of national reason, it was important for them to have some kind of ability to supply their diabetic patients with insulin. We saw also complementary expertise were driving it. You know, firms were wanting to gain access to different expertise, and this ranged from technological expertise to expertise in the regulatory affairs in each country, knowledge of markets, etc., etc. So very diverse type of expertise. We saw also a few cases of co-research and development of traditional medicine, where actually through South-South cooperation, countries were learning how to develop products based on traditional medicine and commercialize those products. So we also saw quite a few challenges. It wasn't easy either in this to cooperate. And some of the challenges that were highlighted was that sometimes some of the countries had very immature regulatory systems, so it was hard to deal with the regulatory realm of this cooperation. But in other ones, they had very different regulatory systems, sort of different requirements of testing, etc. And this is something I also have seen in our research on Canada's cooperation with the emerging economy. The differences between the regulatory system put a lot of burden on countries when they wanted to sort of co-development efforts. We saw long times and cost to move products across international borders, just as there was with the samples in the research side. And then there's some communication difficulties were stressed between the countries, you know, between the firms, particularly. It was quite often mentioned that China was hard to communicate with people in Chinese firms, etc. So here again, we see systemic misalignment hamper the South-South collaboration. So impact of the entrepreneurial collaboration was affordable health products in developing countries a market, basically by getting those health products, they could bypass you know, multinational suppliers and get it more cost effective. And this is very well known from Indian pharmaceutical companies, for example, providing products in Africa much more cost effectively than any other multinational. We saw also increased capacity to meet local health needs in that respect. Ability to leverage on traditional medicine as well. But lastly, like, the impact was sort of increased availability of vaccines in poor countries. And I want to talk about an example of that cooperation, South-South. So the South-South entrepreneurial collaboration that was focused on increasing access to vaccines. So this example is a meningitis A vaccine, which was focused, it involved collaboration between Brazil and Cuba to solve a health problem of countries in the meningitis belt, which is shown here in blue in Africa. And there was a meningitis outbreak. The multinational supplier had changed the product and wasn't supplying the product. So the World Health Organization was frantically looking for new suppliers, and they actually saw that by encouraging cooperation between Cuba and Brazil, that was a promising strategy for them to get the product. The Field Institute in Cuba, they contributed the main vaccine technology, but the Biomanginas of Brazil, they contributed effective scaling up and manufacturing technology, because these are one of the key vaccine suppliers for the Brazilian health system. The price of the vaccine produced through this partnership was lower than that was on the international market at the time. Actually by actually working together, these countries, they could much more effectively provide the vaccine and actually provide it more cheaply than if they had been working only alone. So the role of the World Health Organization was very important for this collaboration, both to actually really kind of initiate it, but also to support it all along. And one of the things that they supported was actually to deal with the challenge that we had identified as the regulatory agencies have very different types regulations, and they help these sort of regulatory agencies of both Brazil and Cuba to start to exchange information and work together. So if you look at the contribution to global health of entrepreneurial, then so entrepreneurial collaboration, yes, then they can contribute towards global health. They share similar health problems and they need to be cost effective. It can, social cooperation can both expand technology transfer and rely on complementary expertise. So this actually can lead to cost effective health products. But you know, one of the things that the production of health products does not equal increased availability of health products for all the countries. So it's not enough to promote the cooperation between health biotechnology firms. There has to be more of a systemic involvement. So what the research on South-South collaboration in general has shown is that there is great potential for South-South collaboration in health biotechnology, particularly to address shared health problems and to reduce cost of health products. We see that South-South cooperation is an underutilized resource, and in order to be able to use it, there has to be more investment. And the investment is not necessarily only government, it has to also be private sector investment, and also multilateral organizations. They can invest more in South-South cooperation, as we saw in the case of the meningitis vaccine. We also saw that firms are active in South-South cooperation, and some focused efforts should also incorporate a focus, considering them as a player. But what we saw, what was the key problem is that we saw systemic misalignment that limited the impact of the cooperation. So in order to have more impact, there's need for much better alignment between the countries involved in international cooperation. So, as we mentioned about capacity building effort, not contributing to research, innovation, and health promotion because of lack of infrastructure and planning, and also the regulatory things. So that was one of the good examples of that. So in terms of sort of what countries can do to leverage more on South-South cooperation is, first of all, to increase resources. Secondly, to prioritize some work on prioritization and looking particularly on where there's likely to make the most difference in for example, South joint health problem. But also they should sort of consider South-South-North trilateral collaboration, where the North can actually, particularly for the North, they share some of the resources that they have or are willing to do for the cooperation. But the North can also use South-South cooperation to be more cost effective and more focused on the problem than some of the Northern technologies is. So it can be benefits to both parties in that way. Include support for entrepreneurial cooperation, but lastly the point, and I can't stress that enough, it seems like maybe like a broken record in that sense, but integrate South-South collaboration, integrate research and innovation activities, integrate training and research and include, for example, seed grants, integrate science, technology, innovation with health system and health promotion. So we want to see much more integrated efforts. There's been a call for a paradigm shift for integration, but so for example, fundamentally a paradigm shift will be required for international collaborations, but decision makers to better integrate trade, investment, aid, and technology policies into a seamless activity. So that we agree with, and we see a systemic perspective help to cultivate this paradigm shift. And in order for this paradigm shift to happen, we need both to work on integration between countries and within the countries. And what we're proposing is actually to conceptualizing international collaboration and of health biotechnology innovation in general, not just South-South cooperation, but other international cooperation, as interaction of innovation system instead of just looking at the interactions between the institutions, which is often done, but incorporate this more systemic perspective. And so we can work on the sort of more on the systemic alignment. I do a very simplified scheme of interacting innovation system, and would love to be able to do this more eloquently. I was saying to Nelly once, I need her brain engineering expertise to think about this systemic thinking and this sort of interaction. So maybe she can give me some tips on, on how I can improve on this graph. So I want to thank you for your attention and invite you to ask questions, comments.
Thank you very much. We can use the microphone, and you can ask questions or make comments both in English or Spanish as well.
Hello, and thank you for your talk. It was interesting. And I have a question because you show an example of the shadows detection toolkit, so to speak. And I was left with a question because I was thinking, yeah, that was a very good example of how cell-cell collaboration can be done, but the commercialization went to naught.
Yeah.
So I would like to know whether that was an isolated case or that is mostly the case. I think it's mostly the case, but you're the expert, so I don't know. That was my question.
I wouldn't be able to say it was the isolated case. I mean, I'm sure there are some more examples of it, but it was more common that the commercialization was in the countries, in the southern countries. And for example, the other case that I took on the meningitis front, it was actually the vaccine was produced in Brazil. So I'm trying to think about if there's molecules, and I think part of it was part of this example was that there wasn't attention paid to, so we couldn't develop this technology. How it's going to work on actually commercializing it by southern partners. And then, first of all, all these countries have to have a consensus of a particular one or two countries commercializing it. It cannot be commercialized in whatever, I think it was 16 countries that work together, and that's too much. So this dialogue, they focus too much on the actual cooperation coming up with the technology, instead of thinking about it from a systemic perspective of how can we actually, when we have something, how can we actually work on becoming a reality. So I think, that's a sort of call for action to a more systemic perspective. There's another example that I was thinking about including, but I didn't, which shows a very interesting also cell-cell cooperation, and shows very wide commercialization of the technology in low and middle income countries, and that's part of the reason. It's actually a triangular collaboration. It's actually a north-south-south, but it has a lot of commercialization in corporations, and that's a monoclonal antibody treatment against had the neck cancer from Cuba that was actually tested by forming an international network of countries that would conduct this sort of basically an international clinical trial. So and this was very widely. It was Cuba, it was Brazil, it was Indonesia, it was Korea. This is now northern countries, but it has India. So, and the commercialization of the technology was in all those countries. It wasn't just in Cuba. So it doesn't have to be like that.
Dante?
Hello, my name is Dante. Thank you for the talk. I want to ask, I like to go to the basis because I am biotechnology. So, which are the criteria for selecting the topics of biotechnology to consider them health biotechnology? Because in some articles they are putting information about, for example, growing plants, but that they produce some antibiotics. So, how you can separate and see the edge between something that is biotechnology and something really is health biotechnology?
Yeah.
For me, it's something interesting.
Unfortunately, that's not necessarily a very accurate measurement, and there are certainly something that has slipped because of this measurement. The way we actually worked on it, because there is no single database about biotechnology. Right? Finding papers that are biotechnology is a challenge, and we haven't formed the algorithm in doing this search engine, but instead, because that was our limitations, we hadn't really done that. We decided to collaborate and gain access to this limitation. So we collaborated with a firm called Science Metrics in Montreal that actually provided us with the health biotechnology database from the publications. So they've actually been working for years in basically improving their algorithm on what is biotechnology and then choosing health. But they still use a rather rough measurement of health, in the sense of it takes the journal that's published in as sort of the journal classification in different areas. So there's no doubt in my mind that your example would for example, slip. But they've done a lot of reports on both in biotechnology and other science areas, and they are, many of them are freely available on the website, so I'm happy to provide if you want to find more about them.
Thank you.
Gabriel?
In a big scope project, who start with a collaboration initiative? I mean, is the government, is a research center, or a company? And how's the process from the beginning to complete any product, for example, the kit?
How did we carry this out? So we started by mapping, and to map sort of collaboration linkages. And we on one hand work by working with Science Metrics, the firm, in mapping the research cooperation through the co-publications of researchers from 2 or more developed countries, and then map the firm collaboration by conducting the survey, which the survey was just incredibly difficult, and I'm not sure if I ever went to a survey like that before. Because part of the problem is that you're working on we did the survey from Toronto, and we were working on many different time zones. And fortunately, Toronto is a very multicultural city, and I was able to attract students that spoke a lot of many other languages because they grew up with them. But what was very unreasonable of me, and I don't think I want to inflict it on students again, is that because of the time difference, some of them had to work in the middle of the night. So that was a huge thing. But we managed to get a very good response rate I think it's about, I know I can't remember exactly, but it was somewhere around 60, 70%, which is very good for biotechnology. But then after we had a list of papers saying these papers, have cooperation between those countries. We could see where the collaboration linkages were mainly between the countries, and then it came sort of then there's a bit of back and forth. We also got some input from the policymakers from different countries and how to go about what countries would feel most interest. So it's a slight political emphasis also, as well as when we're seeing we needed to see enough sort of scientific activity, joint scientific activity to it being of interest. And then from the papers we tracked the researcher down, and the same with the firms. By looking at by seeing from the mapping we could actually track the firms down.
Another question.
Then we talk to everybody. Yeah.
Do you think that entrepreneurial collaboration increased effectiveness in integrating science, the results of science?
Sorry, they increased the
That entrepreneurial collaboration
increased. Sorry, what?
increased the effectiveness
Effectiveness.
in integrating science, technology, and society. Okay. I could hear myself. Or could it be in another way? This integration between science, technology, and society.
I can't say we saw a lot of the social entrepreneurial collaboration integrating science and society, partly because it was too much commercial. So it wasn't enough emphasis put on developing kind of new products. So it has had more effect on the availability of health products by being cheaper, or the possibility of transferring technology from countries that have strength. And that was in that way it was more. What we saw was more entrepreneurial collaboration with other entrepreneurs than a collaboration with producers and others. There were some examples of that, where there was, for example, an Indian company was collaborating with a Brazilian university in developing a diagnostic kit. So in that way, it was more limited to commercialization.
Any other questions? Martha?
Hi, my name is Martha, and I have a question. When I saw your network map about the relations between countries, I realized that Mexico is not a goal for this South-South contribution or collaboration. It's not surprising for me, but I have that question. Why Mexico is in that situation? Why Mexico is not a goal? Do you have an example of these South-South collaborations that implies Mexico? An important one?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, we didn't include Mexico in the study. So if we had surveyed firms in Mexico, they would have come. They would have us on. I'm sure they would have so much stronger presence than surveying the firms in the other countries. We were hoping we would get Mexico or Argentina, some reflection, but there is a certain bias in the surveying firms in certain countries in the sense that you can underestimate others' presence. However, we believe that because these are the countries that are one of the most active in it. We were likely to incorporate a large proportion of the cooperation. I'm sure there are some better people here to tell me why Mexico did not come as a hub in this South-South research collaboration, because in a way, I mean, we had all the co-publications all over the Middle Eastern countries, so there wasn't a bias in the methodology as it was in the entrepreneurial collaboration. I don't know. I invite others to try to it, but there might be, I don't know. There's a bit of slipping into sort of global productions of health biotechnology. I don't know if it's a problem or if it's not a problem. I would like to do more research on Mexico and learn more about the country before I say if it's not, and state that it's not a hub in some ways. It can be a hub in certain areas.
Well, Hala, thank you very much. It was a very interesting conference, and the landscape being presented between the north and the south and all that is quite really sad for the South campus in general. And it's clear to me that landscape, you based it mainly in academic research because you were analyzing papers.
Yes.
And the gap is huge between the United States, for example, the North campus with the South campus in general. And if we add to that the private research in biotechnology companies in the North, that gap would be even worse than this. Now, if we think that in the South campus, mainly, let's say, in the Americas, Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, which are the most developed ones in the Americas, the demographic is shifting very strongly from infectious diseases to chronic degenerative diseases. And if we look into that, the North campus are working mainly the research and investment in firms and biotechnologies is oriented to chronic diseases. With that huge gap, the question would be, what these countries like Mexico, Chile, Brazil, Argentina, in your opinion, they should be doing research or investing in health biotechnology, because if they're going to invest in the same chronic diseases as the North countries, we'll never be able to close the gap, most likely.
So, but on the other hand, there are certain niches that they can work, and in terms of non-communicable diseases, I don't subscribe to that the developing countries should only focus on infectious diseases, because I do think that there's an increases disease burden of communicable diseases, or injuries, for example, and that's one of the reasons why I want to talk about on Wednesday. I want to talk about regenerative medicine, which is a much stronger focus on non-communicable diseases. I think there's a much more drive in the firms in developing countries to try to be cost effective than in northern countries, and I think so. I don't think anybody's going to do that for developing countries. And what's actually quite exciting, if they were successful in developing products more successfully, cost effectively, lobby the regulatory, the sort of global regulatory system, and try to, and build up confidence in their products. Then actually there's the northern countries that are really suffering from this, how expensive our products are. So I think there is a market from there. It's not impossible, and there are many ifs along the road that I think actually this emphasis on cost effectiveness is actually this is it's actually it's a comparative advantage in a sense. So,
Any other comments?
Sí. Well, thank you very much. This overview was very revealing. And let me focus on this collaboration between countries, South countries, and collaboration within a country, Southern country. The first is in Africa. You have spoken about South Africa today, and I know that you published a few years back a paper on Egypt. Okay. Well, one of the Africa is a large continent, and one of the main headaches there is yellow fever, infectious disease, which is really a problem. If people need to be vaccinated in order to cross from one country to another.
yes.
If you are not vaccinated, then you just can't go anywhere. And the powerhouses for science, let's say, even they are small powerhouses, are precisely South Africa, which is in the southern part of the continent, and Egypt, which is considered a southern country, which is really in the north part of the continent. So, is there any collaboration between those countries in order to solve this problem?
Of
To
yellow
have a
fever?
local vaccine, because there would be a very good business.
Yeah.
Probably there are some firms interested, there are some entrepreneurs which would look at that as a good business. And so my first question is, what will be your comments on that particular case with which I came here from India? And the other one is within a country. Well, 10 years ago you published a paper on Brazil, an overview of what was the situation there. And currently you have a very good outlook of how we turn out within some years. But it's now 10 years later. Will you comment on how those expectations were fulfilled, or if what has happened, and what are the problems of collaboration there, not just between scientists in terms of published papers, but also between the government and the academia, and between the academia and the media and the public, and the complex situation that you put in that paper.
Okay. So now these questions are easy. Going to the first one, I'm looking at yellow fever in Africa and the extent of cooperation and sort of the geographic locations of the sort of the powerhouses. And so neither of these countries are in a yellow fever country. That's it. And to the best of my knowledge, there is no cooperation with those countries in yellow fever. But I might be wrong. I don't know everything about those countries, and there might be initiatives that starts there. I've worked quite a bit with South Africa, and in some ways I find that they could actually focus much more on Africa than they do. They when they want to kind of promote commercialization, they're more bound to Europe. And we're with actually economic growth in many African countries, been quite considerable in last years. There's a lot more potential for South Africa to actually to be a more of a leader, African leader than they are. There are things, many things like smaller countries they often go through the regulatory system in South Africa when they introduce new products in the country. So there is, they don't, I don't find that they leverage up on their geographic location to the extent that they can. Egypt is still, Egypt is, I would not count it as a powerhouse in biotechnology. It's very, and one of the reasons we have been including Egypt is we wanted to have a better sort of geographic, distribution. So I thought we didn't expect that. So I don't. So publishing paper on Brazil and then thinking about what's happened in 10 years later. I think I would be very interested in doing more of a study on it. We saw that Brazil continues to publish quite a bit in health biotechnology. It's increasing its publications quite a bit. I haven't seen any data over the patents in recent years. It was a challenge. It's been a challenge for Brazil that they do very good science, but it doesn't. They're published, but there's not enough sort of product development and commercialization based on it. There's been attempts to actually encourage, to sort of align the system to encourage this more cooperation. Around just over 10 years ago, university professors in Brazil, they could not work in industry because they were not allowed to work in industry because they were involved with the university. This was then changed, I think, about the time that this paper was published with an innovation law. In an innovation law, which encourages much more cooperation. I would love to see more of an evaluation of the impacts of the innovation law, and if there's been how they're really observing more differences within Brazil or not. The other thing with Brazil is that one of the problems that they had is that they used to have, they were actually quite early in developing recombinant insulin. And they were marketed in Brazil. But Novo Nordisk is also a very large insulin provider, multinational company, and they underbid the Brazilian company. So they went, and according to the Brazilian health system, they have to buy the cheapest alternative. So they went to the Novo Nordisk instead of buying the Brazilian. So the Brazilian company couldn't operate. Novo Nordisk actually bought them in the end. But now they have changed their procurement law. So there's a small leeway of actually to support local, also support their own local suppliers within. So there's been quite a bit of adjustment in the system in Brazil. Knowing more about how their biological system is operating. Not being a Brazilian, not living and breathing it, and just seeing it more from far away. I don't want to be saying anything more.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Well, I have one. Could you comment on this organization of yours, global, small global?
Small globe.
Small globe.
Yes.
What activities do you do, and how is it funded?
It's a new organization. So it's what what it has mostly done work on is work on within the South-South field, further on in the South-South field, and working with the United Nations organization, because that's an area that they're interested in. So it's not the easiest time to work with new organizations in Canada, I know, because there is funding has been cut in a lot of areas in Canada. Canadian organizations, they sometimes like to pick my brain, but they don't want to pay for it. So that's a bit of a challenge for an organization. And but it's also one of the reasons it was set up more of in a profit organization rather than a consulting firm, is that the organization likes to wants to have the opportunity to apply for research grants. And in some of the funders, you can do it if you're a non-profit organization, and that's also something that we are working on, and we are in the process of trying to get a funding with a group in Kenya on a project that looks at the integration of industrial policies and health policies in Africa. So I don't know if we will be successful in getting funding, but so anyway, and so the small club would be very happy to do a project for Mexico if there would be any interest in it.
Okay, very good. Remember, we will have sessions for this workshop tomorrow and Wednesday in the other auditorium, the auditorio de la Secretaría Académica, which is just in front of the transdisciplinary offices. We will start tomorrow at 10 o'clock up to 1 o'clock. So please be on time, this time. Okay. Thank you very much.